Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last.
It's time for another conversation. This is Making It Last podcast. I'm your host, Neal, and with me this time around is Dr. Neal Johnson, dentist, anesthesiologist. I'm going to hope that I got that right. If I didn't, he'd actually correct me. The topic we have this time around is how to ensure the lines between professionalism and friendship are separate at work to foster a healthy work environment. Welcome.
Thank you.
But before we get into that, give us a little background in terms of your professional. How long have you been working, so that at least people have a context in terms of why I think that you can speak to a topic like this?
Right. So I've been working in various areas for at least 20 years or more.
Okay.
And have had the opportunity to work in different countries.
Okay.
Barbados, Jamaica, United States. So I've been around a little bit, so I've seen a few things and have had the opportunity to work with all types of individuals for several years.
Okay. All right. So now to the topic at hand, Neal. How? Well, let me take this even closer home. Recently, I had a challenge where I recognized that within the work environment, it was difficult for a particular person to actually make that distinction between me as a boss and Noreen as just a friend. So I think that somehow even triggered this topic. Mm-hmm. So how do you think people can ensure that they see Neal as a friend or Neal as a professional?
Well, I think to say that it's not difficult would be lying. And oftentimes lines are blurred.
Okay.
And I don't know that anyone knows how to do that perfectly. And it may almost be better to have the two things separate. It's not always easy to be a total professional every single time. You have a friend who works for you or with you. Makes it can be incredibly uncomfortable.
Okay.
But taken from my experience where I've had, when I was working here in Jamaica, students were, I don't want to say subordinates, but they were the students. I was their professor, but and many of the students happened to be close to my age. And outside of the classroom, a couple of them were friends of mine.
Right.
But when I set a tone, when I stood in front of the classroom, that made it very clear that in here, this is how it was. And I never compromised. I never gave special treatment. If anything, they probably suffered a little bit more.
I think I'm guilty of that too.
Than others. Because I wanted to make it clear that there was no favoritism. So for me personally, I've not had too much of a difficulty making that distinction because when I go into professional mode, it's professional and that's how I behave. And if there has been any tension, I think those are things that conversations you cannot gloss over. You actually have to have them with the individual to say, you know what, look, we are friends. We'll always be friends. But when we are at work, this is a relationship. It's work. I don't mix the two. And this is just how it is.
Okay.
And if you set that precedent from early, then it makes it a little bit easier. Not easy, but easier to be able to manage relationships.
I noticed you said, though, you have work. You mentioned just now that while you were teaching here. Now, contrast that with Barbados and the US. Do you see that culture in any way plays a factor in this or not necessarily? I found that the best experience so far has been the one here. Okay. Because in the United States, people get offended when you have to, quote unquote, pull rank and say, okay, and you behave in a certain way that's professional, but they respond to you in the personal way. Okay.
So then when you look at them and, you know, you indicate to them that this is business, you tend to get eyebrows raised and there tends to be a strain on a relationship afterward. Maybe initially.
Okay.
But I tend to confront things, you know, head on. And I said, look, when I spoke to you earlier, when we were discussing this is what it was about. Is this always how it's going to be? In Jamaica, I didn't have to explain that to the students.
Okay.
They knew. They never crossed the line with me because they knew. And I remember one specific incident when I was leaving to go abroad. 2 or 3 of the students said one of the things they liked is that I never mix business with pleasure. They said I was always fair, I didn't mix the two. And that, if there was anything you could say about me, that was what I wanted it to be. You know, so I still carry that. And I think that's one of the things that motivated me to continue being that professional. You know, because I think people recognize or they had the maturity at the time to recognize that the two were separate.
Okay. What then would be your response to somebody who will say, but, all right, and I'll resort to vernacular here, show me your bridging, where you going, so, you know, and to ensure that at the end of the day, there is little or no tension, you know, what then would be your response to that? Because there are some people who will just say, but, you know, where you going, so,
yeah. And I expect that individuals will get that type of feedback. So now it's an opportunity to respond to that. And sometimes it's not always the best time to respond in that moment.
Okay.
So again, I feel the best way is to have discussions with people before issues arise. Okay. So even if you and an individual are friends and there have been no particular conflict so far, you can't assume that there never will be.
True.
So I would say, okay, you know, we're really good friends. I love working with you. You like working with me. But, you know, just want to make sure you know that for me, at work, it's work. And when we're out, it's different. I want to know how you view it and get a chance for them to give some feedback about how they view the entire relationship. Because again, it is not easy to disentangle the two. I don't want to make it seem like it's just, you know,
cut and dry.
No, it's not that way. But you have to make an attempt to kind of stave off some problems by addressing it early rather than reacting and waiting for something to happen. I don't think that's the best way. So that if I had to suggest anything, I would say talk about it openly, about the dynamic, understanding that there will be times when the lines are blurred and it's not always easy to make the best decision possible, but having an open discussion, I think, does help. Okay.
You actually answered what I was about to ask. So makes no sense, which is that if in all of what we're saying, what then would be some, you know, additional tips you'd have to give somebody? But in all that we've said so far, is there anything else you'd want to add? Thinking about work environment, friendships, and making sure that it's a healthy work environment.
Right. I think I would want to avoid some of those. I would want to avoid personal relationships, to be quite honest with you, at work to a certain extent. Okay. Not to say that you couldn't have friends, but I think, let's say, for example, you have an office situation where it's only you, there are 10 of you in the office, and only 2 or 3 of you are friends. How does that look to the other 7 individuals? Do they feel like there's some type of collusion or special favor going on between you? Or do they see the friendship as enhancing the way how you work together and making a better work environment for all involved? So how do they view it? And I think that's something that you also have to be mindful of, not just between you and the individual or individuals, but how about the others who are looking on and may not be part of that friendship and part of that circle? Are you projecting the right atmosphere so that they don't think that there's any special favor going on? That's all also going to be critical, I think, to be able to, because you're managing that situation as well. But there's room for workplace friendship, but I think that sometimes, you know that there are always inherent dangers with those things. But you just have to manage it the best way possible.
Yeah, but here what the reality is though. Work is where you spend the bulk of your time.
Yeah.
So how easy is it then to even avoid that?
Well, I can tell you this, that it is incredibly difficult. I have had work situations where I and another colleague were friends, and we would talk about all kinds of different things, whatever. But I think she knew where I stood when it came. I didn't cross the line when it comes to certain things, but I noticed that there were people who would drop certain comments about the fact that she and I were close. Okay. And I said, well, yeah, we are friends and whatever the case is, but I recognize that some people looked on it with a little bit of jealousy, and I had to try to manage that. So I had to say to her, I said, look, I know we're friends, but I said, I'm going to limit contact a little bit here, not drastically so that it looks strange, but I said, let's limit contact a little bit so we don't, cause any issues. And she agreed, I agreed, and that went a little bit more smoothly.
Don't you think then that to a large degree, it is then going to depend on the maturity of the individuals and the maturity of the relationship?
Absolutely correct. There are some friendships that are fragile and others that can weather any storm. And if you and an individual are pretty close and you know each other, you know how each other work, how each other think, then if something is said that may appear offensive to someone looking on, it may not be seen that way between the two of you, because there's an understanding. So there are benefits to being close friends as well. Okay. So again, it's very sticky wicket with this one. But I go back to talking about these things openly. To mitigate against some of the damage that can occur if it is not discussed.
Okay. You said a lot, and I noticed you went back to that. But in wrapping up, if you had to say, okay, this is my 3-step formula to ensure that in this work environment, we keep those lines separate and minimize the chances of them being blurred, what would that 3-step formula be?
Number 1, have the open discussion before there's any conflict.
Okay.
Number 2, be mindful of the entire work environment, not just the environment between you and one individual or you and another individual. That I think that's also going to be important, because you're also managing other people who are looking on. Right. And 3, I think, is just to be a little bit open. Don't be hypersensitive. Just always looking over your shoulder, wondering what's going on. Sometimes you just need to go with the flow and just be observant and be willing to make adjustments as you see things in the environment change.
Yes.
I think being adaptable then would be that 3rd thing. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. There you have it. If it is that you don't think you got an answer to that question, it is my hope that in some way your mind was tickled and stimulated into actually searching yourself to see how best in your work environment you can ensure that you minimize the chances of those lines being blurred. This was Making It Last podcast, which is all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, but with other people. I'm Noreen Daly. Until next time.
Husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last.